All right, welcome back. We're going to hit World War II again here, this third installment of a video. And today we're going to talk about the invasion of Europe. We're going to talk about the D-Day invasion. We're going to talk about Operation Overlord. Sorry, I was looking for a tool there, couldn't find one. All right, so anyways, Operation Overlord is basically just this code name for the European invasion of Europe. Of nearly 3 million troops are going to be gathered in southern England, and the invasion itself is going to happen on June 6, 1944. That's going to be the date of D-Day, and we are going to invade the beaches of Normandy, France. There's actually five beaches that are going to be invaded by the Allied forces. Two of which are going to be solely American beaches. And the other three are going to be shared either together or individually by Canada, Britain, and France. One of the interesting things that leads up to this invasion, we talked about in the previous video, we talked about the Allies in Italy. And one of the generals that really distinguishes themselves in World War II in this invasion of Italy is going to be a guy by the name of George Patton. And George Patton is, debatably the best field general of the United States Army. And Patton is kind of a crazy old guy. He has these beliefs that he believes in reincarnation, and every time he's been reincarnated, he believes that he is some kind of was a soldier in a past life. And if you talk to him, he would tell you that he's been in basically every major battle in human history. But what Patton, I guess what Patton possesses as a positive on the battlefield, he kind of has a negative off of it. He's really hates cowardice, and he has a very rough and tumble demeanor. And so, following a battle in Italy, Patton goes to a military hospital to talk to some of the troops, and he sees a soldier kind of in the corner by himself, and he goes up to this guy and he's like, "Soldier, how are you hurt? What's going on?" And the guy just, he's crying and he's snotting all over himself, and he's, basically blubbering on about how he can't go on. And so Patton calls him a coward and starts to physically beat him. And the press had accompanied Patton to this visit, so they see him beat this soldier. And so you have this 3-star general or 2-star general at the time attacking a common enlisted private, and in the United States that's unacceptable. And so Patton loses his command, and he's taken out of the field and he's sent back to England. And the Axis forces and the ideas of fascism would totally allow a general to beat up a common soldier if need be, right? And so the Axis powers don't believe that Patton was relocated or taken off of command. They believe that he's going to be the leader of this invasion force. And so one of the interesting things is, instead of just leaving Patton by himself, they give Patton a fake army. Basically, they put him in northern England. They build plywood tanks and planes, and they move him around, and they have a certain number of troops that all they do is kind of march around the base, and they make themselves really visible to Axis intelligence. And so the Nazis are expecting the major invasion force to come from the north, led by Patton. And so when this invasion happens on June 6, 1944, across the English Channel into Normandy, the Germans don't respond as quickly as they probably would have liked to, because they're expecting this secondary wave of invasion to come from Patton and his troops. But Patton doesn't have an army at that time, and so it's this kind of cat and mouse game that's going to be played. All right, so up on the board, if you guys have not seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, I would really encourage you to watch it. At least watch the first the opening battle scene. It's on YouTube. It gives you a really good idea of what probably what that invasion might have looked like or felt like. on the ground level, and you have an assignment where you're going to read points of view of the invasion from multiple angles. So you're going to get a pretty good idea there. But Allied forces are going to use paratroopers. They're going to drop behind enemy lines. They're going to cut communication lines. They're going to sabotage certain bridges to prevent an enemy counterattack from coming. I have this picture here of a little cricket. That's actually what I was looking for at the beginning of the video on my desk. It's just like a little kid's toy or a dog trainer that if you squeeze it, it makes this little sound. And so these paratroopers that get dropped, these airborne troops that get dropped behind enemy lines, use these to regroup, because if you think about, in the French, the countryside, it's going to be dark in 1944, and you don't want to call out and give away your position. And so what you would do is you would just click this little toy, and it would just make that noise and you would listen, and hopefully somebody would respond with and then you would try to regroup on that noise, and then you would put together small little units of paratroopers to carry out jobs that were supposed to be done behind enemy lines. And so with the the troops' ingenuity and their resourcefulness, they're able to cut a fair number of communication lines and blow up bridges and delay the Nazi response to the initial invasion. Here's the famous picture of Normandy. The American beaches, probably the most famous is going to be Omaha Beach. That's the one that's featured in Saving Private Ryan. And so one of the reasons that beach was so devastating to the invaders was that it had a deeper shelf, or had a shorter shelf of coastline. And so when the armored tanks that were supposed to come on the beach were originally dropped off, they sank to the bottom of the ocean. And so these men were forced to basically take this beach against just incredible odds and firepower from the Germans, without support of armored tanks on the beach. And so like the Canadian beaches and the and Utah Beach, the tanks, the armor made it on the beach. They made that invasion landing a little bit better. Omaha, they don't have that support, and they have to get the artillery support from the Navy, the naval boats that are off in the channel. And so they do that. The Americans are able to overcome their obstacles and eventually take a toehold there in Normandy. And so by the evening of June 6th, there's over 100,000 Allied troops on the beach, and it's the world's largest amphibious assault. And the invasion basically has begun. By July of 1944, there's over 1 million Allied troops in France, and it's really kind of spells the beginning of the end. The war was, to be honest, the war was over before the invasion. It just this is just one of those final steps that has to happen. And so the Americans land in Normandy. They fight their way out of an area called the hedgerows, where if you think of like today on farms, you have barbed wire fences, or even some places in Kansas, you'll have like limestone fences to like keep animals in or whatever. Well, this area of France had been domesticated and farmed for so long that they used hedgerows, which was just like these big hedges, these like thorn bushes that grow together. And so we have what's referred to as the Battle of the Hedgerows, where you would have small fields that were surrounded by these hedgerows that were really, really thick, and to the point that you could have armies in opposite fields, only separated by basically shrubs that are 8 to 10 foot high. And it takes a while to break through these and to push the enemies out of to push the Germans out of this area. But once the Allies do break through, it's pretty remarkable what they're able to do. By August of 1944, the Allies had freed Paris. By September, the British and the Canadians are deep into Belgium. and by the winter of 1944, so 6 months into the European campaign, there's 3 million troops on the border of Germany, and so the Germans are going to launch a massive counterattack to try to push back this Allied advance and to break through. And it's referred to as the Battle of the Bulge, because if you would look at here we go, just have the paper right here. If you look at like if you're ever in my in-class classes, you'll know what a great map maker I am, right? I said that tongue in cheek because these are awful maps. And so if we look at this here, if you can see that, we have Germany and France, right? And so you have your battle lines. You have your this is your front lines, and you want to try to keep your troops in as continuous of a line as humanly possible, right? So there you go. There's your front line coming through. And this Battle of the Bulge is referred to as the Battle of the Bulge because the Germans are going to attack in the middle, and they're going to create this big bulge in the line. This big bulge in the front lines. That's referred to as the Battle of the Bulge. And it happens in December of 1944, and it's probably the most it's the hardest fighting that the Americans are going to face during the Second World War. It happens in the Ardennes Forest in Belgium. It's the same place the Americans are going to launch their huge offensive to end in the First World War. Some of the interesting things about this, the 101st Airborne is going to be dropped into an area called the Bastogne. And they're going to be basically encircled by the Nazis, and they're holding on to an area that's going to that acts as like a main thoroughfare of bridges across river. It's an important river crossing, and so the Nazis are trying to take over this area, and they have these guys surrounded, and the Nazi general basically wires into the commander of these troops, and he calls for his surrender. Well, the American commander had been up for multiple days, and he decided that he was going to try to take a little bit of a rest, and so he lays down for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and he gets woken up by one of his secretaries, and the guy's like, hey, the Germans are asking for our surrender. And the American commander was a little, he's coming out of sleep, not sleeping for a couple of days. He's pretty groggy, pretty tired. And he's like, oh, the command, they want to surrender to us, and the secretary's like, no, the Germans want us to surrender to him. And he's like, nuts. And so that's what he writes back to the German. He just writes back, nuts. That was his response, that the Americans weren't going to surrender. And to bring this, I think, full circle, I guess. By that point, General Patton had been given command. He'd been demoted and given command of a new army, and he's the one that goes in and rescues the 101st Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge in Bastogne. All right. In February of 1945, following this Battle of the Bulge, Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin, they meet in Yalta, which is a resort town on the Soviet Black Sea, and they're basically discussing what the world's going to look like after the war. The Americans are able to stop the Germans from any type of a breakthrough during the Battle of the Bulge, or the Allies are able to do that, and eventually push back the Germans to the original line, and then and continue their march forward. And so the Yalta Conference basically helps to shape the post-World War. We agreed to this idea of a new international peacekeeping body, which is going to become the United Nations. It's agreed that the Soviet Union is going to declare war on France within 3 months of the German surrender. The Soviets are going to be given some territorial concessions for that. We create post-war borders for Poland and for Germany, and we agree that we're going to divide Germany up into 4 military sections. Each of the major Allied forces are going to get a section in Germany. So Russia is going to get a bigger piece in Eastern Germany. France is going to get a piece of Germany, Britain, and the United States. And we're going to set up governments that are broadly representative of all democratic elements. And we agree, and we agreed to all of this, and Stalin's going to agree to all this because hey, we're all trying to get along and we're all trying to win this war. But by the time we get to Potsdam, the Potsdam Conference, which will be the third meeting of the Allied forces, Stalin is going to start to backtrack on some of his agreements during this time frame. Okay, so in February of 1945, the Americans began what some people will consider maybe even the most unhumane bombing campaigns of the war. At this point, the Americans had developed a predecessor to napalm. It's an incendiary bomb. They would call them like jellyfish bombs. Basically, it's this napalm gasoline oil concoction that when it hits it burns, and it's almost impossible to put out. And so in your reading you're going to have to read about the firebombing of Tokyo. That's one of the cities in which we use napalm bombs or these incendiary bombs. The other place is going to be Dresden, Germany, where we kill somewhere between 135,000 and so there's some estimates of over 1 million civilian deaths in one bombing raid. I think it's probably a little bit closer to 100,000, but that is still that's more civilian casualties than take place in the atomic bombs. And so some people will argue that this Dresden at this point was not an important military target, but it was chosen because this was going to be a city that the Russians were going to come through on their way to Berlin. And so as the Russians advance, we bomb the city to kind of send a message to the Soviet Union to hold up their ends of these bargains moving forward, or this could happen to you. April 12th, 1945, Roosevelt is going to die of a stroke in Georgia, Warm Springs, Georgia, and Harry Truman, who is his vice president, becomes president. Truman was relatively new to the assignment. Roosevelt had only been sworn in after his fourth election in 1945, or I'm sorry, 1944. In March of that year, so April, Truman had only been vice president for a short period of time, and he's going to oversee the end of the war. In Europe, on April 25th, 1945, the Allies and the Russians are going to meet in the Elbe River, which is just 60 miles south of Berlin. The Russians have actually bypassed Berlin in some sectors. And the Americans have marched the other way, and we meet in the middle. We allow the Russians to conquer Berlin because of the atrocities carried out by the Germans against the Russians. And on April 30th, Hitler's going to kill himself shortly before the Russian troops completely take control of the city of Berlin. About a week later, on May 7th, the Germans are going to surrender to the Allied forces. So that's May 7th, 1945, which is known as Victory in Europe Day. And the Nazis the Germans sign a unconditional surrender with the Allied forces and submit to a complete surrender. And so that's where we're going to stop here. We'll come back and we'll finish the war in the Pacific. So April 30th, 1945, the German capital Berlin falls into the hands of the Allies, and May 7th, 1945, the Germans are going to surrender. And so that will be where we'll stop this one, and we'll come back here shortly and finish it all up. So thank you very much. Hope you learned something, and we will see you later.